You're watching Alabama football recruiting on BamaInsider.com. What's up, everybody? My name is Trey Hannity. Welcome back to another edition, joined as always by the 18-year veteran, best-selling author, recruiting expert, Andrew Bone. You can find him on Twitter, guys, at Andrew J. Bone. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel as we get into the show tonight. We got a lot to cover. Another big weekend at Alabama as LSU came into town. Some big visitors coming into town with them. Commitment again this morning, a little bit earlier today. Andrew, how are you doing? Isaiah Hastings made the decision this morning around 9 o'clock, adding to this class and another player on the defense that means a lot for this class as well. Let's talk about this commitment, your thoughts on it, how are you doing tonight, and everything going on in your world.
Yeah, doing great. I mean, this is a great commitment for Alabama. This is a kid that moved down to the United States from Toronto, Canada, back in June. Didn't play his entire junior season and ended up going to a camp. I think it was a Mercer camp in June. There was a lot of colleges there, a lot of college coaches that were in attendance, and I think just about every single one of them that was there extended him an offer. And then kind of went throughout the summer, didn't really get a chance to go to really many camps because he was trying to get settled in at Clearwater International Academy. Once he got kind of settled in, college coaches started hearing about him, started taking notice. So a lot of these top schools, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, all extended him offers during the season. So this was a guy who picked up offers late during the season. A lot of people didn't know about him, but this is a 6 foot, 4.5, 295-pound defensive lineman that can move. He can run. He's still pretty much a little raw because he didn't, like I said, he didn't play as a junior. He had to move down to the United States because of the COVID restrictions in Toronto, Canada, or in the whole country of Canada, not just Toronto. So, good thing he moved because he finally got noticed by a lot of college coaches. This kid's ranking is going to go way up. I think he's going to be a consensus 4-star on all the sites when all's said and done. And, definitely somebody that a lot of programs really liked a lot, really started pushing for late in the process. And, we've seen this before with Alabama in terms of, evaluating guys waiting to take commitments from some guys. Because, listen, there are some kids in the top 100 right now who would beg to get on Alabama's commitment list. But Alabama wasn't taking some of those guys. They were evaluating, they were waiting. They saw this guy, they loved him, and really pushed hard for his commitment, got him wrapped up today. So Isaiah Hastings, the latest commitment for the Crimson Tide, and I know Alabama coaches are extremely excited about this one.
They certainly are. And I mean, what a big move all the way from Canada, having to move it in a crazy time as well. Obviously, it pays out as he does get the offers. And from Alabama as well, making that commitment earlier this morning. And, Alabama is something we talk about a lot on this show, really needed some defensive line recruits in this class. They get Hastings to join. So, what does this mean for the defensive line class overall? Is there any other targets? A couple of visitors this weekend, Caden Curry, Anthony Lucas as well in town. Are these guys still on the radar? Where do they stand now? Where does the defensive line class stand for Alabama?
Well, I think Alabama is excited about its defensive line class. You get a big defensive lineman in Isaiah Hastings today to add to Jaheim Otis, who's an absolute monster. He's 6'5", north of 350. So you got your big interior defensive lineman. You got your 5 technique pass rusher on as Isaiah Hastings. So I think Alabama fans should be really excited about the direction of this defensive line class. I think the next one, it's probably going to jump on board. And I don't want to say he's going to commit soon, but I think he's one of these next defensive linemen that Alabama's got a great chance to land, and that's Curtis Perry. This is an in-state kid, little undersized, but he's having one heck of a senior season. I think he's up to 19 sacks for his senior season. I mean, that is. I don't care how big you are. That's really impressive. He's 6'1.5", about 270 pounds right now. Definitely, plays with a high motor, very intense, very high intensity, and definitely somebody who has, really shut up Alabama's recruiting board. Alabama really liked Curtis Perry early on in his recruitment. They wanted to see him a little bit more. Wanted to see him during the summer because they hadn't seen any kids throughout the entire year. So they wanted to see him during the summer. He ends up not camping. They saw him early on during his senior season, and hey, he really, really made a strong impression. So this is a guy that they really want to get as a part of its recruiting class. Now, as you mentioned, 2 guys who were on campus this past weekend. were Caden Curry and also Anthony Lucas. Anthony Lucas making his second trip to Tuscaloosa from Scottsdale, Arizona. He took his official visit back in June. So this was just an unofficial visit. So he traveled all the way from Scottsdale with his family for his second trip with the Crimson Tide. And I had an opportunity to speak to Anthony last night about his visit. I mean, he just loved the overall game day environment. Just thought that it was just unbelievable. Loved the night game. Loved seeing all the lights. Said he had a really great time, spending time with a lot of the commitments. One of the interesting parts about our conversation was his connection with Jake Pope. They don't really have a strong connection, but they both took official visits together to two different schools during the summer. They both took their official visit together to Alabama. They also took their official visit together to Notre Dame. So they've had a really good connection with each other, have remained in contact. Jake's been recruiting him heavily to Alabama throughout the whole process. I do think Alabama is very much a top contender for him. I think it's an Alabama, Texas. You look at, I think if you look at the future cast right there, you see 100% Texas A&M. That's one prediction from a Texas A&M writer. That's not, rivals, analysts making all their predictions. That's one Texas A&M writer who put in a prediction for Texas A&M a few months ago. So don't pay any attention to that. Just wait until all the dust settles and we make our final predictions on these guys here in the next month or so. Lucas told me last night, not sure when he's going to make a decision. Could be soon, could be during the early signing period, or could happen at the All-American game. So he's just kind of waiting it out, going to let these in-home visits happen. Once again, we say this every week, something that didn't happen last year was in-home visits. Nick Saban did not get to go travel to these different homes and these different communities and sit down with these players and their families and really get a chance to get to know them in their hometown and really sell the University of Alabama. He gets a chance to do that during these official visits, but once you kind of get this really one-on-one time with Coach Saban, he puts on that blue blazer. He's got a chance to really close the deal on a lot of these top recruits. So I think once we kind of get into December, we'll know a little bit more on where some of these guys are going to end up going. But I think Alabama did a great job with Anthony Lucas this weekend. Now, Caden Curry, a little bit different. He's a Midwest kid, has really been leaning towards staying a little bit closer to home throughout the process. I still feel like that's going to kind of be the same situation there. Even though he had a great visit to Alabama, I still see him going to Ohio State. So as far as defensive linemen are concerned, I'm looking at Curtis Perry, looking at Anthony Lucas as potential next guys to potentially be in Alabama's defensive line class. And keep in mind, you can also go recruit the transfer portal. That's something that's open for business these days. So Alabama's not looking at it saying, all right, there's 4 spots left. We got to go get 4 guys. They might get 2 or 3 guys and say, all right, we'll get another guy in the transfer portal. So it's not like Alabama's necessarily not necessarily filling a spot. They can fill that spot a little bit later down the road. So keep that in mind.
They certainly can. I mean, look at this season. A guy we got to hear from today, Jamison Williams, has been such a big part of this team. Transfers, the transfer portal is still a thing, and Alabama can certainly use that as well. But some great names there, and another big commitment for Alabama in Isaiah Hastings, and a really big weekend this weekend as well, Andrew. We talked about it last show. Some of the guys coming into town, just a lot of official visitors. And we know there's one guy that, a lot of people want to talk about in Domani Jackson. We want you guys to talk about all these guys. Get in the comments. We're going to take your questions at the end of the show, whatever you want to know. Somebody already asking about Domani Jackson. We're going to get to him here in a second. I believe we had Richard G as well, giving his thoughts on the big weekend. I know you want to give your take on that, Andrew, but let's talk about Domani Jackson to start here. Your thoughts on him. Made another trip to Tuscaloosa this weekend. Is there a realistic chance that Alabama can flip him away from USC?
Prior to the weekend, I was thinking about that a little bit. I thought, this is a USC kid. He's an LA kid. He grew up, wanting to play for the Trojans. But after this weekend, it just and you always look at, you always kind of have to let the dust settle after these official visit weekends because you're on this really big emotional high. You're seeing things you probably never seen before. You're enjoying yourself and having one of the best times of your life. So you have to kind of let the dust settle after these visits. But after this weekend, I mean, I really think Alabama's got a really strong shot to, to potentially flip him. And Alabama was able to do this a few years ago in flipping Bryce Young from USC, and at the same high school, Mater Dei High School in Santa Ana. So I think they're going to be. I don't want to say they're going to do it again, but I think they're going to have a really good chance to do it again. I think the biggest thing right now is who's going to be that next USC head coach. I think that's something that he's really looking at and waiting for before he makes that final decision. But he's been talking to Alabama for several months, almost on a daily basis. Has a great relationship with Jay Valai, defensive backs coach. Talks to Coach Saban a lot. Has a great relationship with a lot of the commitments already on Alabama's team. Even though he's a West Coast kid, he's been to Tuscaloosa beforehand, and he knows a lot of these kids, from the recruiting process. So he came out and said that Michigan's basically out of the mix for him. He had taken an official visit to Michigan earlier this season, and it was really an Alabama, Michigan, USC battle. Now he says that Michigan's out. It's Alabama or USC. So you got to like where Alabama, sits right now, but you also got to kind of wait and see, how are things going to unfold out at USC with this new coaching staff. He's got a great relationship with Dante Williams, the current interim head coach. Is he going to remain on the staff, and is that going to play a major factor? But Alabama really blew him away this weekend, and I think they've got a really good chance to flip him in the end.
That's great to hear. Really a big time recruit here, but we've seen big time recruits at USC flip their commitments to Alabama. Won't talk too much about that, but there's other guys I really want to get into tonight. We got to thank you guys for being here as well. My guy DeMarco Poole getting in the chat here. Thank you for being here again tonight, guys. Hit that like button. It's as simple as clicking one button. We got 76 right now and one like. You guys can do a little bit better than that. And Alabama looks to continue to do better on this recruiting trail. Marvin Jones Jr., along with Earl Little Jr., a couple of big names in this recruiting class coming into town this weekend. They're teammates now, Andrew. Can Alabama get the package deal here and land both of these kids?
Well, I think they really have a chance to do that. I think with Earl Little Jr., I think I really like Alabama's chances there. I mean, I've had him locked in as a future cast to Alabama for several months, and it's not changing anytime soon. He's going to be making a decision in December. He's not taking any more visits, and Alabama is in the driver's seat. So I really feel confident saying that Earl Little Jr. is going to be in Alabama's recruiting class. Now, can they get his teammate Marvin Jones Jr. on board as well? I think there's a really strong chance there. I think Alabama really hit it out of the park with him this weekend. This is a guy who's one of the top edge rushers in the country. He can play that jack linebacker position, and certainly somebody that Alabama would love to add to cap off this outside linebacker class. But he's certainly a special football player. Florida State, Oklahoma, really strong contenders there. His father, All-American from Florida that played at Florida State. So obviously a lot of pressure there, but I think Alabama did a really good job recruiting him this weekend, really kind of laid out their plan for him. And I feel like they've got a really good chance to pull him in. He's best friends with Dallas Turner, who had a great game this past weekend, and obviously, really close with Earl as well. So, I think he would feel very comfortable in Tuscaloosa if he decides to go there, but he's going to probably wait, until the end to make that decision, probably sometime in December during that early signing period. So I think Alabama's got a really strong shot with Marvin Jones Jr. and obviously with Earl Little Jr. as well.
Yeah, the pipeline of outside linebacker just continues to get stronger there. Keep an eye on those guys. Some more receivers in town. A couple kids out of the state of Louisiana. Now, Alabama already has a commitment from a receiver in the state of Louisiana, and Aaron Anderson. But a couple more players in Kendrick Law, Shaz Preston coming into town this weekend as well. Can Alabama land these two guys?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I would be surprised if they don't land one of them. I've always kind of felt that way. We've said that before on the show, that I felt like Alabama would at least get one wide receiver from Louisiana this year. Of course, they already did in Aaron Anderson. But I think there's a really good chance that they get another one, and it's not out of the question that they get all three. Kendrick Law was in Tuscaloosa this past weekend for an official visit. Alabama, Texas, probably, really battling out for him. Now, he's not saying anything. He's keeping things pretty tight-lipped regarding his favorites, and he hasn't really done many interviews throughout the entire process. But, just picking up bits and pieces here and there. It certainly sounds like this could come down to Alabama and Texas. LSU still, pretty much in it, but as of right now, I would be surprised if Kendrick ended up going to LSU. Now with Shaz Preston, this is a guy who I always felt like would likely end up at LSU, but after another trip to Tuscaloosa this past weekend for an unofficial visit, I think Alabama's got a tremendous shot with him as well. Alabama really trying to add a couple more receivers to this class. I always kind of felt like they would add, that they would sign 4 receivers. They have 2 right now with Kobe Prentice and also Aaron Anderson. I think Kendrick Law and Shaz Preston could be the other 2. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. But I think with some of these other guys, likely going elsewhere, like Evan Stewart, probably staying in the state of Texas. I don't see Alabama, really in the picture anymore with Barry and Brown. So these are the guys that I think Alabama fans should really kind of focus in on over the next month or so.
Yeah, I think we need to add him as a finalist for the all-name team as well. Kendrick Law and Shaz Preston making their trips to Tuscaloosa. Shamar James made the second visit in the last 3 weeks after decommitting from Florida. What are your thoughts there? He seems pretty comfortable in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, it's I know Alabama's excited about getting Shamar James back on campus, and this is a guy that remember he chose Florida over Alabama when everybody thought he was going to go to Alabama. Obviously, decommits from Florida. I'm sure he kind of saw the writing on the wall as we saw several of the coaches get fired this week, including the defensive coordinator. So, what's going to happen with Shamar James now? Well, all of a sudden, Georgia's in the picture. He was going to take an official visit to Georgia this past weekend, but ends up making a trip back up to Tuscaloosa. Now, he is currently scheduled to visit Georgia in December. So that's the visit that everybody's kind of, waiting to see kind of what's going to happen there. I'm sure Alabama's probably a little nervous about that trip because I'm sure they probably feel like they've got a really strong shot with him right now. But, getting him on campus maybe that final weekend before he makes that decision, I'm sure Kirby Smart likes that, likes his odds there. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. But this is a guy that Alabama's really liked a lot for a long time. He's had some great trips to Tuscaloosa, and Alabama certainly continues to push hard for him.
For good reason, a really talented player there in Shamar James. And a former Alabama commitment. This time, Le'Veon Moss was back in town this weekend. What are the Tide's chances here? It's almost like trying to get the ex-girlfriend back this time.
Yeah, with Le'Veon Moss, he's one of these kids that doesn't talk at all, doesn't talk to anybody. Keeps things extremely quiet, very tight-lipped, and I don't think I don't know if it's a media thing or if it's just he doesn't like to talk to anybody type thing. But even when he committed to Alabama, he didn't talk to anybody about his commitment to Alabama at all. And then we saw him decommit a few months later, but making a trip back to Tuscaloosa this past weekend, obviously pretty big for Alabama to get him back in town. Came back with his mom, and I think he really likes Alabama a lot, and has felt very comfortable with the coaching staff. I still feel like Alabama is going to add another running back to this class, and we've been saying Le'Veon Moss, Jamarion Miller, who's currently committed to Texas. I feel like one of those guys is going to end up in Alabama's class, and it might be the first one that decides to jump on board, but we also might have to wait until this early signing period to see which one it's going to be.
Yeah, certainly we'll have to wait on it. Guys, keeping those questions in. I've seen some really good ones so far. We got a couple more, then we're going to take your questions for Bone here. Get those knocked out. But before we do that, got to talk about a couple more visitors. Some bigger guys, the O-linemen coming into town. Julian Armella, Nato Umozelulu. How do these guys end up finishing with the Tide's class? What would this mean for the offensive front if Alabama could get these guys to commit?
Yeah, with Alabama's offensive line, it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that all unfolds when all is said and done, because Alabama right now has 3 offensive line commitments. Always felt like they would only get 4 in this year's class after signing the best offensive line class in the country last year. Alabama fans got to remember, Keontae Goodwin, who's a Kentucky commitment, took a visit to Alabama a few weeks ago, has Alabama high on his list, and still strongly considering the Crimson Tide. Devin Campbell, who's a 5-star offensive lineman out of Texas, also took an official visit to Alabama. Now, I think Campbell ends up staying closer to home. I think Texas, maybe Oklahoma in the driver's seat, but Alabama's still pushing hard for him. So, do you take another offensive lineman right now and potentially lose out on getting Keontae Goodwin. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that just yet. Now, these are guys that they're recruiting. These are guys that they like. They're guys that they brought on campus for official visits. But I think in the end, Alabama's probably going to wait to see what happens with Goodwin, with Campbell, and then kind of make a decision a little bit later on as to what they're going to do with some of these other offensive line targets.
Yeah, it'd be big. I mean, last year's class, like you said, such a, talented offensive line group. This one's shaping up to be the same way. And now we get to one of my favorite parts of this show. I love hearing all of your thoughts, Andrew, but I love seeing these questions as well. We've had some great ones these last couple of weeks. And this one I want to start with, it's a little bit ambiguous. Maybe if you want to focus in on certain players here, but how firm are all of Alabama's current commitments?
Well, I think for the most part, all of them are pretty firm. It's funny. Somebody posted a rumor on our message board just the other day that Ty Simpson was strongly looking at Tennessee, which is, trust me, that's a bunch of horse crap. He's not looking at Tennessee at all. He's very firm with Alabama. Jaheim Otis, there has been some speculation, and I think it's coming more from the Mississippi State side of things than anything that he's potentially going to flip to the Bulldogs. I don't see that happening at all. Even though he's an in-state kid for Mississippi State, and Alabama fans are familiar with the way Alabama recruits in Mississippi and how tough it's been for several years. I just don't see it happening. I think Alabama is very confident that Jaheim Otis is going to flip. Now, one guy that we are watching pretty closely, and we're going to watch him all the way until he decides to sign his letter of intent, is Robert Woodyard, the four-star linebacker out of Williamson down in Mobile. Now, hasn't made a trip back up to Tuscaloosa this fall, but he has been being recruited by some other schools, including Auburn. Would not be surprised if he decided to end up going elsewhere. But we'll just have to kind of wait and see how that all unfolds. But he hasn't really said much. Has kept things extremely quiet. Now I know that he says he's still committed to Alabama, but also mentions that Auburn and some other schools are still recruiting him. And that's probably the main one that we're watching in this class right now. Is where might he end up, and it might not be Alabama.
Yeah, could not be. We're gonna keep an eye on that one. And thank you for Jonathan Hurst getting that question in there, one of our regulars. Let's move it along down here. Got a question on the safeties now. This one coming in from Think Twice. He wants to know what you think about the safeties in this 2022 class.
Well, you look at Antonio Kite. I really like him a lot. I think he's got a chance to be a really special player. Has performed really well on the offense side of the ball this season. Defense side, people just try to avoid him as much as possible. I mean, he's a 6'1.5", 190-pound athlete that can fly to the football, and he's certainly certainly had a great senior season. It just ended last week. He actually had 135 yards receiving in just the first half alone in his playoff game last week. Got banged up a little bit and didn't really do anything else the rest of the game. But yeah, he's definitely somebody that I'm really excited about, just because he's one of these kids that didn't play until his junior season. Was a star basketball player, had a lot of basketball offers, but then decided to focus on football and has really blossomed into a really talented player. Then you have Jake Pope. He's got good size, 6 foot, 190 pounds. Comes from one of the best high school football programs in the state of Georgia at Buford High School. Alabama knows what they're getting in him, and I think they're excited. Traquan Fagans, Traquan's a guy that can play multiple positions in the defensive backfield, and I think once he kind of gets to Tuscaloosa and kind of figures out what he can do, and what Alabama will also have to figure out what he can do. Is he going to be a safety? Is he going to be a corner? I think he's more in that nickel type star role, but we'll see kind of once he gets to Alabama. He could end up playing corner, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, maybe the next Malachi Moore on our hands there. Let's move it along now. Theodore Ma wants to know about Zach Rice. Is he locked in North Carolina, or does Alabama still have a chance to swing him?
Now, Zach really hasn't been that much of a target for Alabama in quite a while. I know he just committed to North Carolina, over Alabama and Virginia, some other schools, but he really hasn't been on Alabama's radar really since he visited, during the summer. Alabama really kind of focused in on, some of these other offensive line targets like Elijah Pritchett, Tyler Booker, And there's some other guys that are out there, like we just mentioned a few minutes ago, Keontae Goodwin and Devin Campbell. That's kind of who they're mainly focused on right now. So Zach Rice, I haven't really followed his recruitment really since his visit to Alabama, just because we knew that Alabama really wasn't strongly going after him anymore. So I think with him, if he does decide to flip, it won't be to Alabama.
Certainly. So, guys, keep getting those likes in. We got a couple more questions to get to before we close it out tonight, but we appreciate your support. And go check out BamaInsider.com as well. Andrew Bone has a lot of great content out there. You guys can check out throughout the week. I believe a commitment of the week coming out at some point as well. But let's move along. Maybe two more questions here. The fans want to know about the running backs, the potential running backs, I guess, who Alabama is looking at, maybe the next target at that position.
Well, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, Jamarion Miller, Le'Veon Moss, those are kind of the two guys, really focusing on for the next, month or so. I think Alabama ends up getting one of those guys. Not sure which one it's going to be just yet. I just think they're going to get one of the two. I said this a couple of years ago with Pat Surtain and Tyson Campbell. Everybody thought Tyson Campbell was going to Alabama and Surtain was going to LSU. I kept saying, I think it's going to be one of the two, but I'm not confident enough which one it's going to be. And then I think maybe on signing, maybe the morning of signing day, I said, all right, it's going to be Surtain. Tyson Campbell's going to go somewhere else. And that's what happened. He went to Georgia, and obviously it worked out pretty well for Pat.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Out there in Denver now in his rookie season. Close it out tonight. We have a couple fans wondering about Barian Brown. Maybe just a quick update on him to wrap us up here.
Yeah, I think there's some off the field stuff kind of happened. I think Alabama's kind of shifted its focus on some other receivers. They have two wide receivers committed currently, Kobe Prentice and Aaron Anderson, focused in on Chaz Preston and Kendrick Law. Obviously, Evan Stewart's still in the mix, but I don't think he's going to leave the state of Texas.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Thank you guys for getting those questions in for us, as you do each and every week, and for joining us tonight, hitting that like button, being here, hanging out with us. We're going to be back next Tuesday to break down the world of recruiting Alabama with another home weekend. So it's going to be good to get some more guys on campus and a lot more to talk about next week. But guys, go to Twitter, check out Andrew's Twitter at Andrew J. Bone there, and check out his work on BamaInsider.com as well, along with the rest of the work. There's a lot going on right now as we continue to get through this season. Week number 10, as crazy as that sounds, is upon us now. Check out the rest of our YouTube page, all the content, breaking it down. But for Andrew Bone, my name is Trey Anity. We'll see you next week. Roll Tide.